Hi, Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, September 29th, 2023. The week is gone or nearly gone already. One of the most fruitful times of the week is now, however, at least for Judging Freedom fans and those of us that put it together for you. And that is our intelligence, pardon me, our intelligence roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. I want to start right off the bat, getting right to the heart of the issue. Larry, is the United States at war with Russia?
Yes. I mean, we're not firing anything.
We lost you for a second, Larry. We heard yes.
Yeah. I said we're definitely at war we're not yet on a war footing in this country, but we are at war.
How is it that you can say we're at war? What are the earmarks of war that exist now? You're talking about functional war, not formal war.
There's no basis of discussion or negotiation between the United States and Russia right now. Well, what are we going to talk about? Russia's made it clear they're not going to give up any of the territory they've taken. They're not giving back Crimea, and they will not accept Ukraine going into NATO. It's that simple. The United States, but for its part, is supplying targeting intelligence to Ukraine that's being used to attack and kill Russians. Plus, it's providing the weapons. If you're back on the bench as a judge, and you've got somebody who's charged with murder as an accessory because they gave the guy the gun and the bullets and the way to break into the house, you wouldn't sit there and go, "Oh no, you're not involved." We're directly involved.
Very, very, very compelling argument, Ray. I'm going to guess you agree.
Well, I would say that we're co-belligerent. Whether that means we're at war or not, that's up for you to decide.
That's got to be a CIA word that you learned in CIA spy school, no?
Poetic.
Well, I think it's a legal term, which you should.
The reason I'm asking this, of course, is are American human beings and assets fair game for the Russians? Do the Russians, Ray McGovern, consider the United States to be at war with Russia because of the substantial and material support we have provided the Ukrainians in Ukraine?
You took the words right out of my mouth. The answer is yes, and that's what matters. Russia has openly declared. Lavrov, the foreign minister, the former president Medvedev, they've said explicitly, we are at war, the United States and Russia. That's the way they look at it. Now you can talk co-belligerent, you call real belligerent, or just quasi-belligerent. But without the U.S., Ukraine could not wage this war. That's clear to everyone, and that's what needs to stop. There is some prospect that the aid will be cut off now. I think Putin and the rest of them sitting back and saying, what's going to happen in the next couple of days? This will be interesting.
All right. Well, as we speak, gentlemen, the House of Representatives has voted down the legislation that came over from the Senate, which would have kept the government going for the next 31 or 45 days. I think there were several versions of it. It seems almost certain that there will be a shutdown. I don't know if a shutdown will affect aid to Ukraine because this money comes from a presidential drawdown. He doesn't go to the Congress and ask for it. He already has that blank check. It depends on how much of that drawdown he's used. But I do think that the forces to stop the aid, at least from the American perspective, are gaining strength. Does Russian intelligence, Larry, inform the Russian military of the presence of Americans in Ukraine, whether the Americans are soldiers of fortune, volunteers, U.S. military out of uniform, or CIA gathering intelligence?
While I have not been briefed by Russian intelligence, what I do see is this: Russians have better human assets on the ground than the United States. Russia has a long history and being very effective at placing human intelligence assets in other parts of Europe. So why is that important? They've been able to identify hotels and places where these mercenaries, these foreigners, are coming. In fact, remember one of the very first big blows more than a year and a half ago was at this base Yavoriv in western Poland. I mean, in western Ukraine, near the border of Poland, and it was a de facto NATO base. So I'm sure they know largely where many of these mercenaries are, where many Americans are, and they've stepped up their activities over the last month or so in killing them.
Ray, are CIA and MI6 physically present, physically, not digitally, physically present in Russia as we speak?
Oh, in Russia. Well, there are certain agents, I would not brag about the ability of MI6 or CIA to have profitable, really good agents in Russia. I don't think they do. I don't see any evidence that really good information is coming from significant levels of Russian authorities. So I thought you were going to ask Ukraine. Now, of course, Ukraine is full of, as Larry said, assets from Russia. And among
Right.
other things, they have the Ukrainian security services and armed forces thoroughly penetrated. There's no secrets from the Russians as to
Well,
what's going on.
okay, Ray, does CIA direct or control Ukrainian intelligence?
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah. Zelensky is really, in very real terms, a puppet. He doesn't do anything without U.S. Acquiescence, at least, usually permission. Now, right after the coup in Kiev, who went to Ukraine to tell the people what to do? John Brennan from the CIA. People don't remember that. He went, and that's when they launched this offensive against the eastern provinces, which didn't want to submit to the coup regime. So that was the die was cast. The interesting thing that it was Brennan that gave him the word, and it's the CIA, and in cooperation with Blinken and Sullivan, that pretty much run things there in Kiev.
Larry, we pretty much agree that the United States is functionally, if not formally, well, we know not formally, at
Right.
war with Russia. Can we say the same thing about NATO? Is NATO functionally at war with Russia?
Yeah, I think,
And
yeah, they are. But it's again, you've got, they're trying to avoid the direct confrontation. What we're seeing that's taking place, remember, more than a year and a half ago, there's touted, we've never seen more unity among NATO over fighting Russia. Well, that unity is breaking apart.
right.
Hungary's not necessarily on board. Poland has started raising objections. It looks like the Slovaks may elect somebody who's going to basically pull Slovakia out of doing any kind of military support for Ukraine. But within that, NATO is supplying intelligence, and NATO really is sort of a costume that the United States puts on, because
Mm.
as a actual fighting entity, NATO is powerless. They really don't have anything.
Here's Secretary General Stoltenberg on Ukraine. Cut one, Gary, gradually gaining ground. I don't think this is credible, but you guys give me your views on it.
When I was last here in April, we discussed our preparations for NATO's Vilnius summit and your preparations for the counteroffensive. Today, your forces are moving forward. They face fierce fighting, but they are gradually gaining ground. Every meter that Ukrainian forces regains is a meter that Russia loses. And there is a stark contrast. Ukrainians are fighting for their families, their future, their freedom. Moscow is fighting for imperial delusions.
Almost sounds to me like he's trying to sell NATO onto Kyiv. What do you think, Ray?
Well, the whole notion that Russia entered into this fray to control, invade, or occupy Ukraine is bizarre. It's as bizarre as the neocons or the Russophobes, like Hill, like Professor Hill. What's her name?
Fiona Hill.
Fiona.
Okay, so here's what she said in a New York Times op-ed exactly a year and a half ago. Mr. Putin's aim is bigger than closing NATO's open door to Ukraine. He wants to evict the United States from Europe. As he might put it, quote, "Goodbye, America. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, period," end quote. Delusional. Not one scintilla of evidence that Putin has this in mind, that he's going to take Poland next and the Baltic states. Give me a break. And yet this is Stoltenberg. This is the party line that they espouse. Americans, too many of them, believe it. That's what we have to work on.
Larry, as a statement like we just witnessed, and I got another one to play for you, effective on the international stage?
No, it's laughable. I mean, he says they're moving forward. If you stand a corpse up and the corpse falls forward, you say, "Yeah, hey, that body's moving forward," but it's not moving of its own volition. And what you have going on in Ukraine is mass slaughter. The Russians are killing Ukrainians in horrific numbers, and they have not seized any territory of any consequence at all.
The Guardian of London reported yesterday that 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers have surrendered since the end of August.
Yeah.
Now, that's just less than a month ago, using an app, a surrender app.
Right.
That guarantees them communication with the Russians, safe passage into some area that is not involved in violence, food, medical care, and appropriate treatment. I'm assuming there's a source for this, but if this is true, it's got to be humiliating for President Zelensky, Ray.
It happens to be true. I mean, one could dismiss it as Russian propaganda, but these things are possible. And Colonel McGregor has told me that his sources confirm that it's truth. Now, what McGovern thinks is not relevant when Colonel McGregor says that he's hearing the same thing from his sources.
Hey, Judge, let me interrupt. One thing to think about on this. The reason the story appeared in the Guardian, I think, is it's an intelligence operation from the West to try to shut down that means of surrender. Because once you publish the frequency, you're able to start disrupting and creating some problems with that.
Okay, you are so wicked smart. I don't know if you've seen the article, Larry, but the article published the frequency.
Yeah.
The frequency of this app, so that I guess that allows Ukraine Intel to shut it down.
Right.
After they've lost 10,000 men. Here's Stoltenberg again. It's a little longer, but at the very end, he says Ukraine's future is in NATO. Cut 2, Gary.
The stronger Ukraine becomes, the closer we come to ending Russia's aggression. Russia could lay down arms and end its war today. Ukraine does not have that option. Ukraine's surrender would not mean peace. It would mean brutal Russian occupation. Peace at any price would be no peace at all. Ukraine needs a just and sustainable peace. And I therefore strongly welcome President Zelensky's 10-point plan to achieve that goal. So, Mr. President, Ukraine's future is in NATO. As we work together to prepare you for that future, NATO will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Gentlemen, isn't this hogwash that Putin wants to occupy and repress Ukraine? So the last thing in the world he wants is to have to run the government there, Larry.
Well, just go by the numbers. Since 1991, Russia has been involved with 5 military operations outside of Russia. All of them were on its border, counting with this Ukrainian invasion, special military operation, however you want to call it. Since 1991, the United States has been involved with over 215 military interventions in other countries. So, just judging by the numbers, tell me
Right.
which country is acting like an imperialist. It's like the old saying, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, probably a duck. And so when we're out there involved with constant and never ending war, that's what it's become. This, we have got to continue to fight somebody in order to keep the defense industries going, because America's economy depends on it. And it's sick.
Just the devil is in the details here. 5 weeks after the Russian forces went into Ukraine, the Ukrainians pretty much sued for peace. They started immediately, and so did the Russian side. Let's talk. Let's see if we can work this thing out. The Russian invasion scared the hell out of the Ukrainians, as well it should. They got together. They talked. They talked in Belarus. They talked in Istanbul, and they came to an agreement. Neutrality for Ukraine, no more shelling for the Donbass, various agreements on the side. It was signed on the 31st of March. So count the weeks, 5 weeks after the invasion. Next week, Boris Johnson came in from London and said, look, you guys might think you can deal with these terrible Russians, but we don't believe it. We're not in on this. You better knock that off. 2 days later, Putin admitted, look, the Ukrainians have backed off here. Looks like we're in for a long slog. And indeed, had that been honored, had the U.S. not intervened, then 50,000 or 500,000 people might be alive now that are now dead because of the continuing war. So that was the proof in the pudding. That's what the Russians and the Ukrainians wanted to deal with. It didn't have to do with Ukraine. It had to do with Russia and the United States, and people like Fiona Hill saying they're going to occupy Poland, Baltic states, and they're going to kick us out of Europe. And they're going to say, Putin will say, goodbye, America. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, period, end quote, in the New York Times, for God's sake. And unfortunately, that's what most Americans believe to be the case.
And Larry, because the British Prime Minister, since the days of Churchill, has basically been a poodle for the American president, there's no way Boris Johnson did that on his own without Joe Biden telling him, asking him, saying, you got to go do this, Boris, because Zelensky's crazy enough to accept a peaceful solution.
Right. Well, remember that one of the Ukrainian negotiators was actually murdered. He was assassinated by Ukrainian intelligence. One of the guys who was seen as being too pro-Russian, too willing to accommodate Russia, they took him out.
Wow.
So this has now reached a stage where the West is starting to make noise that, okay, let's negotiate. And that 10-point peace plan that Stoltenberg referenced, that Zelensky's plan, it's a non-starter. It wants Russia to pull everything, get out of Ukraine completely, turn over Vladimir Putin for trial, pay reparations to the Ukrainians. It's not even a serious offer. And Russia's just made it very clear that there've been Lavrov, the foreign minister, Shoigu, the defense chief, and then the equivalent of the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Russia. They've all said the same thing in the last week, which is either Ukraine capitulates or Ukraine's going to cease to be a nation. Those are the only two choices. So
it's great, Larry and Ray. Here's a very temperate President Putin. It's in Russian. I'll read the subtitles. He's talking to a group of people in one of his large grand rooms. You'll only see two of them. You'll see Foreign Minister Lavrov, and next to Lavrov, a gentleman appearing a little bit more athletic than Foreign Minister Lavrov, who I believe was Prigozhin's number 2 person in the Wagner group. and you'll see President Putin more or less baptizing this fellow as the new leader of the Wagner group and wanting them to engage in hostilities because of the skill with which they are known to fight. Here's President Putin with me reading this.
Андрей Николаевич, я хотел бы нашу встречу начать
Andreevich, I would like
с
to begin the
разговора именно с
meeting
вами.
by
На последней
speaking
встрече
to
мы
you
говорили о
in
том, что
person.
вы займетесь формированием
At the last
добровольческих
meeting, we talked
подразделений,
about you working on
которые
forming volunteer units
выполнять
that can
различные боевые
perform
задачи, прежде
various
всего, конечно, в
combat
зоне
tasks, above
специальной
all,
военной
of
операции.
course,
Вы сами
in
более
the
года,
zone
да,
of a special military operation. You have been
подразделение.
fighting for over a
Знаете, что
year
это такое,
in one
как
of
это
those
делается,
units.
знаете,
You have been fighting for over a year.
вопросов,
You
которые
know what
нужно
it is, how
заблаговременно
it's done.
решать,
You know
чтобы
about the issues that
боевая
need
работа шла
to be resolved in
наилучшим
advance so that the combat
успехом.
work goes best and in a most successful way. Now, why would President Putin say that in front of cameras unless he is obviously sending a message, Ray McGovern?
He's sending a message that he's in control, and that includes this group, the Wagner group. Now, Troshev, who goes by the name Sidoy, which means gray-haired guy, and you can see why in the video. He's disputed as one of Prigozhin's real top lieutenants. There is a lot of backbiting on the part of some of Prigozhin's closer friends that this guy is really just kind of not really number two, that he's being anointed by Putin to be number two. So there's still some doubt as to how much control Putin really does exercise over these people. But clearly the scene was set so that, look, President Putin is in control, and Troshev is the anointed successor to Prigozhin. We'll see how that works out. I don't think it's a done deal.
Larry, before we go, RFK Jr. Predicted yesterday that the United States will soon be sending advisors to Ukraine, a la LBJ sending advisors, in air quotes with my fingers, to Vietnam. I don't know if this is a political statement or if he has a reason for it. The three of us are fans of his, certainly on these foreign issues. But that would be the beginning of a hot war, U.S. Against Russia, and probably World War III.
Well, actually, I think we've had advisors there all along, and you've been working closely, both from the intelligence side and the military side. So, and plus, if you send advisors now in the same role that they were in Vietnam, say in 1962, 63, you got to ask the one question: what are they going to do? Who are they going to advise? Because Ukraine has faced such devastating loss that the 12 brigades, so you're talking upwards of close to maybe 60,000, between 45, 60,000 Ukrainian men that were trained by NATO, at least nine of those brigades, they don't exist anymore. They've been destroyed. And so Ukraine is now faced with the task. They've got to round up some more bodies, and they got to train them. And training is, if you're going to train anybody to be somewhat competent on the battlefield, you're going to need at least 6 months. So just start working out the math that we've got. We're coming to the end of September now. So you got 3 months left in October, November, December, and then you get January, February, March. So conceivably, to train up a new army for Ukraine to have something to throw into the meat grinder again, you're looking at 6 months. Russia's not going to be sitting by the fire, drinking vodka and popping popcorn during that time.
Wow. Ray, what will it take for American intel, U.S. intel, to grasp reality and for reality to make its way up to your friend, the director of Central Intelligence, and then over to the White House?
Judge, the people in the CIA and some in the Defense Intelligence Agency knows which end is up. Whether they succeed in telling their superiors, their principals, the real story is really problematical, but it's also probably not matterable. In other words, it doesn't matter what they tell them, they're committed. Bill Burns, who knows chapter and verse as to why the Russians reacted the way they did, he now spouts all the propaganda about it being unprovoked and blah, blah, blah. He's told the president, we're winning. As a matter of fact, Russia has already lost, and its ineptitude in the military sense has been laid bare for the whole world to see. Delusional. So whether or not the troops in the ranks have the right story, it really doesn't matter. Once again, when the military is involved, and as we are in Ukraine, they call the shots and they prostitute, forgive my word, the intelligence.
Got it. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Another great roundtable. It is a treat for me. We've been friends. The public knows the three of us have been friends for a long time. But for me to pick your brains like this with an international audience is a treat for the audience and for me. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, my dear friends.
Thank you, Judge.
Thanks,
Sure.
Judge.